Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We appreciate your support and we appreciate you being here. For my interview today, we will be interviewing Mark Fisher. Mark Fisher was in Scientology for 17 years and was a top executive who worked at the Scientology headquarters in Hemet, California. We will be talking about Mark's experiences in Scientology as well as some of his experiences after he left Scientology. So please welcome my guest for today, Mr. Mark Fisher. Hi,
Hi, Claire.
Mark.
Hi. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much again for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I'm looking
Yeah, it's
forward
my
to our
pleasure.
conversation.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. Let me just fix this. There we go. All righty. So, where would you like to start, Mark?
Well, I mean, if you want to find out how I got into Scientology and that what happened with that, I wasn't born into it like you were, but
Yes.
I joined Scientology when I was 14 years old. My father got into Scientology. He was retired Navy, and he bought a Dianetics book at the drugstore and read it, and then he went into the founding church in Washington D.C., which is where we lived. We lived in the Washington D.C. area, and he went in and he did some processing, auditing, and he also did some training. And he thought it would be good for me. I was going into my sophomore year of high school, and I had problems as a kid, like every kid has.
Right.
And he thought that it would, help me. So that's how I got introduced to it.
Okay. And we have some pictures that we'll share along the way here, but how about I just go ahead and show the first picture here and you can kind of explain where this is in relation to your experiences in Scientology.
Okay.
So let's see here. Here we go.
Yeah, that's a picture of my family. I think I'm 15 years old there. That's me in the back, obviously the tall one in the back.
Yes.
Um, in the center is my sister, my older sister Betsy, and then my younger brother Doug, and then my dad is sitting in the front, and then my mother is sitting next to him. And this is right around the time, just shortly after I got involved in Scientology. Like I said, my dad got involved, and then he got me in, and well, when I started out, the first thing I did was, like everybody, I did the communications course,
Yes.
and I really enjoyed that because I had a hard time talking in front of people and talking to people, talking to girls, that type of thing. And the
Yes.
communications course really helped me. And then from there, he had me do the study technology, which was the student hat course. And I did that. And this was in the Washington, D.C. organization, which in the 1974, 73, 74, it was big. It was big and booming. So like when you went in and did the communications course, there was easily 150 people in there doing it with you. I mean, there was a lot going on. So it felt like kind of the thing to do. Like it was pretty cool to be there. They had just
Yes.
moved into their new building that they had at the time. And it was exciting for me. I would go in the evening after I got out of school and do my course, and then I graduated. And then my dad paid for my first 12 and a half hours of processing Scientology auditing. And I did my, my life repair, and I had some major, realizations and wins from the auditing, and it got me hooked, basically.
Understood. And
Yeah.
so you said your dad got you in and he got your brother and sister in as well.
Yeah, it started with me. My sister
Okay.
was older, but he got her in eventually once she went to college, and then my brother, he was younger, so he didn't get involved until after I had graduated high school and gone off to join the Sea Organization. So they were my mother never got involved. My mother didn't understand Scientology, and she didn't really want to have anything to do with it. And then shortly after I graduated in 1976 and joined the Sea Org, my parents got divorced.
Wow.
So they weren't together anymore. But my
Do
mother's
do you
still
think that
alive.
was because of Scientology and their
Yeah.
difference of view? Yeah.
Yeah, and my dad kind of had, you know how it is when you become a Scientologist, that's your world.
Right.
Everything, the people that you to hang out with and communicate with and or want to be with are Scientologists. And if somebody's not a Scientologist, you kind of grow apart. So that's kind of what happened. But my mother's still alive. You know, she's 92 years old, and I take
I
care of
see
her
your
here.
pictures on Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you have her back. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And then so my dad was in Scientology, and then he went all the way up to the old OT7 before, you know, there was you know, I'm talking to you about this, but before the not Ned for OTs, he did the old OT7, and he also went to the Flag Land Base, and he did his auditor training up through the briefing course.
Okay.
So he was a Class 6 auditor, and then became the executive director of a mission outside of Philadelphia in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And it just so happens that that's the mission that David Miscavige, Ron Miscavige Sr., brought his whole family into Scientology through that mission.
Oh,
so
wow.
that was a connection there. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So your dad was the ED of the mission.
He was the ED of the mission until 1979, and then they got in trouble with the Guardian's office, which is the Scientology, you know, which now it's also Office of Special Affairs, but in those times the Guardian office. He didn't, but the mission did, because they didn't agree with the management of the missions from the Guardian's office. Anyway, and then they got involved in another group. So they basically were declared suppressive persons in 1980. My brother and my dad. My dad, you know, who was the executive director, they closed the mission down. That's why they were declared, because they didn't want to be part of Scientology. But my brother got declared. He was only, I think, 15, 16 years old. He'd only done the communications course and the HQS course, and he got declared when he was 16 years old. So I had the choice.
So you were in the Sea Org.
I was in the Sea Org, and then I had to make the choice, like every Scientology Sea Org member or whatever, if I was going to disconnect from my father and my brother, which of course I made that choice, because at the time I was in the Sea Org, I wanted to work with L. Ron Hubbard. He was still alive, and I was at the Flag Land Base in Clearwater, and I wanted to go to the location wherever I thought L. Ron Hubbard was. So you had to, you know, there was no choice in my mind. I was a dedicated Scientologist, so I disconnected from my brother and my father.
And of course,
rolling forward.
And of course you would have had awful consequences had you refused to disconnect.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the thing was, is that just I'm going to jump way ahead. When I finally left Scientology in September 1990, I reconnected with my brother and my dad about a year later. And, you know, I've connected with my brother ever since. My dad passed away in 1996. And so, but we were reconnected all during that time. So that was that.
At least that part, you got out of Scientology and were able to reconnect with them. That's awesome.
Yes, absolutely. Now my sister never, she became a public Scientologist, somebody who would get services. Her and her husband got, you know, heavily involved as public Scientologists. They were paying for courses and services. And I'll get into this later, but basically they disconnected from me, obviously, when I left the Sea Org. And so we'd lost touch. But she passed away in 2011.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. She passed away in 1911. The sad thing is that, you know, her husband and family, and they never bothered to contact me or my mother or our family at all. So I found out about it 6 months later on Facebook, just surfing through somebody's Facebook page and finding her. And everybody was talking about her in the past tense. And what happened? So I went back earlier, and she had died the previous November. And then nobody bothered to tell us. That's Scientology for you. They just cut you off.
There.
And they never bothered to tell you. That the really hard part for me was having to tell my mother, because my mother had no idea that my sister had died.
I can't.
So, you know, that was a heartbreaking thing that happened in 2012. So anyway.
I'm sorry for your loss, and that just is awful. But like you said, it epitomizes Scientology and their practice of destroying families and hurting people. Spot on.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So then I joined, I actually graduated high school. All through high school, I did, my dad wanted me to, you know, the subject in Scientology of exchange. In other words, you know, you don't get things for free. You need to pay for them, or you need to do something for them. So my dad didn't want to pay for all my auditing and training, so he made me pay for it. So I would work in the summer times at a summer job, make money, and then during the fall and the winter, I would buy auditing, and I would do the processing during that time. And it was much cheaper then. I mean, 12 and a half hours of processing then was $500. Okay. But also, because I was under 18, I got a discount. I think I paid like $320 for every 12 and a half hours. So I got about 100 hours of processing, and it's all through high school. I got all the way up through my grade 4.
Wow.
My
that you
Dynex
paid
rundown,
for yourself.
my drug rundown. I did all of that before I ever joined the C organization. So I was just hooked, you know what I mean? And I you know, I'm sure you're this way too, Claire. There's things that were good about what we learned and what we did in our training and auditing, and then there's things that were really bad. But I got a lot of benefit out of my grades auditing. That's where I got my biggest wins as a person and as when I was in Scientology. So I was totally hooked, you know.
Yes, I understand.
Then,
the way I will just add a comment. My personal view on it from having left is you have to grant and understand the power of belief in all of this. If you believed it was helping you, whether or not it actually was, you believed it was, and like a drug addict, you know, not that that's what you were, of course, but or like any addict of anything, you know, and I'm speaking from my own perspective, not your perspective, but
and the other thing, part of it too, is people always ask, well, how did you you're a smart guy, how did you ever get involved in this? No, I wasn't like you who were born into it. I mean, why did you get involved in it? You know, well, my dad. Okay, well, but you're a smart guy. What happened? And there is some things that help people on the lower end of getting into Scientology that hooks you. You know, I mean,
though to be fair, you were also a teenager, and
absolutely.
So
what I mean is that
don't underestimate that either. Like that's you know. And
and the thing is that, you know, a lot of the people we know were really intelligent people, and they got involved, and they go, well, how did you get hooked? Well, they hook you, and then it gets changes after that. So I just wanted to point that out.
And also, I'll point out the really intelligent people have and continue to get out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely,
just, you know, again, but yes, I do understand. And it's a question I've struggled with, even though I was born into it. You know, people will say, well, like you said, well, you seem like an intelligent person. How could you fall for that? But again, the power of belief and
then you become a true believer. Just like any religion, you could become a true believer in your faith or whatever it is that you're involved in. And then you believe, like when they say you're going to hell, well, there are people that believe that that's what's going to happen to them, you know? And for us as Scientologists, we believed that if we were, you know, declared suppressive people, that it wouldn't just last this lifetime. We believed in many lifetimes. You know what I mean? So it was very powerful at the time. Now it takes, after you leave, it takes time, and you kind of get away from that, and you kind of go like, okay, well, that was crap, that wasn't true, and this, you know what I mean? And that's dealing with the real world, and you go like, well, this was true for me, but really this was a bunch of crap, you know what I mean?
And I would also just add, so you were a teenager, they carefully and specifically accrue leverage over you, like your whole family except your mom, your siblings, your dad, we're all in anyway. Either way, let's get back to your story.
And the thing is that, like, I know you know this too, because my mother was not in, to me, she was somebody that I didn't want to really associate with, which is sad at that time.
It is.
You know what I mean? But that's the mind hold that it has over you.
Right.
So anyway, I graduated high school, and before I graduated, I met at the founding church in Scientology in Washington. I met Greg Wilhare.
Okay.
And his wife at the time, Sandy Wilhare, was pregnant with Darius, which I know you know who they are.
Yes, and just for the audience listening, Greg Wilhare has been a top executive in Religious Technology Center for many, many years. But yes, I'm sure we'll get to that part.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but I just was telling you because you know that. But anyway, I met him, and you know how it is when you meet somebody who is in the Sea Org who is dedicated. They're like a powerhouse. You know what I mean? You like they were rock stars as far as I was concerned as a teenager. I was going like, man, I want to be like that. You know, I want to be like him. And
Yes.
so that's how I had been accepted in three universities that I had my pick of to go to, but I decided instead to sign my billion-year contract and join the Sea Organization. So
Wow. And
that's what I
what
did.
year was that?
That was I graduated in June of 1976, and then I waited until after the 4th of July in 1976. That was the bicentennial and the big celebration in Washington. And then I went to Clearwater, Florida, shortly thereafter, like the first or second week of July.
Okay. So you're 18 years old and you joined the Sea Organization.
17 at that time.
17.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I went down there, and first thing I did was I wanted to be trained up as a auditor, somebody who processes other people. But
Yes.
then because I was 17, I was a young guy, and this and that, they said, "Oh, well, how would you like to work for L. Ron Hubbard?" And then they had this organization, which is called the Commodore's Messenger Organization, and these are the young people who actually worked for Hubbard as his messengers and his emissaries. To get done whatever it is that he wanted to get done.
Yes,
I went,
and
oh,
they
well, that sounds cool.
specifically and intentionally targeted very young people.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So anyway, I said, yeah. So I was put into the Commodore's Messenger org. And at that time, Annie Broker was the commanding officer there in Clearwater. And there were other, senior messengers, ones who actually started with L. Ron Hubbard on the Apollo and the ship, who had been messengers since they were like 10, 11, 12. And Shelly was one of those. Shelly Miscavige was one of those messengers.
Okay.
So I was moved to a dormitory room, and David Miscavige was there. He had just dropped out of high school the month before when he turned 16, and he couldn't wait. His dad wouldn't let him join the Sea Organization until he at least got 16, and then he dropped out. So he was my roommate. That's where I first met David Miscavige.
Wow.
And so we were roommates up on the 9th floor of the Fort Harrison Hotel.
Okay. So 1976, right?
Yeah, 1976. And I met Shelly then too. She was a messenger then. She was 16 years old. And she was cute. I'm not gonna lie to you. All of the messengers, the girls, and when you're a 17-year-old boy, oh, they're cute, and they were the cutest, females in the Sea Organization as far as everybody was concerned. So, Shelly at that time when I met her when she was 16, she was a typical, 16-year-old. John Travolta had just come out with his first music album, and was a big heartthrob on Welcome Back, Kotter, and Saturday Night Fever had not come out yet or anything like that. So she thought he was, was really cool,
Yes.
And he was a Scientologist. So that's what I remember about Shelly. But Dave was my roommate and I lasted all of 30 days in the Sea Org. I'm not going to go, I don't need to go into tremendous detail, but basically I had a run-in with somebody, and I was not a dedicated Sea Org member at that time. And so I fought back on something that I thought was ridiculous.
Okay.
And then I was punished, and I was kicked out of the Sea. I was kicked out.
Wow.
Like after like 3 weeks, because I stood up to somebody, and then they didn't want me in there. So, and I was young and all that. So they put me over into the central files, which in Scientology, they keep files of everything, right?
Yes.
And they had huge rooms with 3-drawer filing cabinets. And these were the mimeographed issues, the Hubbard policy letters and technical bulletins were all filed there. And I was sent in there to, do the work in the files, right?
As a form of menial punishment, I'm assuming.
Yes. And so, but I had no idea. I was such a green Sea Org member.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So I was put in there, and I was talking to this lady that was in there, and so we were talking, and of course my motivation, part of it was in the Sea Organization, besides helping others, was I wanted to get up, move up higher and higher in Scientology on the training and processing side. So I asked her, I said, so where are you at? And she told me she was on her OT levels and OT3. And I'm thinking, man, I've messed up my life. I mean, this lady is an OT, and she's sitting here, filing papers. I said, I should have gone to college. This is a mistake.
right?
So I blew. I actually left. I told them I wanted to leave, and then they were gonna, fitness board, do like a review board to send me out, and I just got tired of it. I didn't want to wait, so I just booked a plane ride home and left the Fort Harrison and flew back to Washington D.C. and moved it back in with my mother.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that was in July 1976. I lasted all of 1 month. Okay,
Wow.
but
So
then what
then
happens?
how'd you end up back?
If only I had followed, stuck to
I
it
know.
then.
Again, I always say that we all have those well-equipped elephant-sized rear view mirrors, right?
Yeah. Well, the problem is because my dad he was a mission holder, a mission ED executive director. Since I had blown the Sea organization, left the Sea organization, he really couldn't communicate. He could communicate to me, but I couldn't do any services until I paid off my freeloader debt. And you know what a freeloader debt is.
From your 3 weeks in the Sea organization, they wanted you to
Yeah.
pay for any courses and training or counseling that you did while you were there.
And all I did was listen to the Welcome to the Sea Org tapes, which are a bunch of lectures by L. Ron Hubbard. And I had a freeloader debt of $3,000.
What?
Which doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but in
But back
1976, that you may as well said $30,000. I mean, $3,000 was a lot of money.
For listening to some lectures that you were required to listen to, to even be a Sea organization member. Unbelievable.
So anyway, make a long story short, I didn't want to be cut off from my father, and I really missed the Scientology processing and training. I still was of the mindset that I was a Scientologist. So my dad helped me get a loan to pay off the $3,000, and then I had to do, lower, ethics conditions in order to get back in good graces. And then about a year later, I just decided, I made a mistake. I want to rejoin the Sea Org, which is what I did. I ended up going to Los Angeles, and I had to do a program. I wanted to go back to Clearwater, but I had to go to Los Angeles first. Yada yada yada. I got to, Clearwater, and then I started my Sea Org career there. And then I was there until I left in September 1990.
Okay, so you were 18 when you went back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and so when did you arrive at the headquarters in Hemet, California?
Okay. Yeah. So what happens is, I was, I eventually worked my way up where I was in international management of Scientology organizations. It was based in Clearwater, Florida, in the West Coast building. I know you know what that is.
Yes.
And basically, we managed all of the Scientology organizations all over the world. I think there was 100 and something, 140 or whatever, in every continent in the world. And our job was to get the orgs to expand, to get bigger, through management. And we did statistical analysis, we wrote programs, and we did this thing called evaluations. And just like there's a case supervisor for when you're getting processing, where an auditor will, give you a processing session or whatever, and they have to turn it into a case supervisor to review and make sure that you're doing the right things. Evaluators, people doing evaluations of an organization, they have to submit their evaluation to somebody, just like a case supervisor, to review it and approve it to make sure that they were following L. Ron Hubbard's policies. Well, I did my 2.5 hours of training every day from the time I started in the Sea organization all the way until I left. So I had already done the senior management training of the organizational executive course and the flag executive briefing course, and then I'd done the data series evaluators course, and I took to it like a duck to water. I had no problem. A lot of people had problems using the data series and doing evaluations, but to me it was easy. I had no problem at all. So what happened was I started out doing evaluations. I was really good. At the time, all the evaluations had to go to the international headquarters, and they had to be approved. L. Ron Hubbard wasn't around, but there was senior messengers who were there. They were part of what was called the Watchdog Committee. Okay. And that Watchdog Committee was basically L. Ron Hubbard's buffer in terms of overseeing the management to make sure we were doing our jobs. Anyway, that's when I got pulled to the international base to train me to be the one to approve all of the evaluations. So I was
So
made
essentially,
the
you were
senior
going to be
case
the
supervisor.
senior, yes,
And that was
directing
in
all of the
1981.
Okay, so 1981, and you arrive at the headquarters for training.
That's right. And you've been there, obviously. You know, when I came there in 1981, it was not the palace that it was when I left in 1990, which they say palace, you know what I mean? It wasn't renovated. It was an old golf
I call
course.
it Hotel California more like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It was literally, you know, you came there. First of all, it was confidential. Nobody knew where it was unless you were going there. And so Scientologists didn't know where it was because, we actually believed that's where L. Ron Hubbard was. So when I went there for training, I literally thought I'm going to see L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, that was my belief. And so I was super excited to go.
And by this time, how old are you now?
Let's see, 1981, I was 23.
Okay, so 23, yeah. And you so when you get there, you thought you were going to meet L. Ron Hubbard finally.
Absolutely. Well, here I'll tell you what happened is, you know how it is. They would bring you in at night, so you couldn't see where you were coming from. You flew to Los Angeles, and then they would drive you out to Gilman Hot Springs, which is right next to Hemet and San Jacinto, and that is the base, Gilman Hot Springs, right? Yes. So you drive in at night, so you don't see anything. So they put me right to bed. And when I woke up in the morning, I came out, there was a house next to the garage, the big garage, and it's no longer there anymore, but that was the berthing, or the place where we were living. It was an old house that had been on the property. And I walked out and I see these mountains, you know, they're not huge mountains, but you know what I mean? The hills behind it. I went, wow. I said, where am I, you know? And then I did a walk over to the Massacre Canyon Inn, which is where we would eat and stuff. And I looked up to the left and I saw this house up high. Yes. And it was Bonneview, which was L. Ron Hubbard's house. I go, that's got to be where he's at. You know what I mean? He's living up there, you know? Wow. And I was quickly disabused of that idea, but that yes, that's his house, but he's not there.
Oh, boy. Broken promises, what Scientology is best at.
Yeah. So it was like, he's not there. He was off in hiding, running away from the IRS and everything. But that I thought for sure he was there.
Wow.
So anyway, so I was there. I did my training. I went back to Florida for, you know, another till like the summer of '82, and then I was brought up in August of 1982 to permanently be at the international base, to be part of RTC, Religious Technology Center, which was just being formed up. And so,
for everyone listening, Religious Technology Center is David Miscavige's organization that polices all levels of Scientology and runs everything in Scientology by virtue of David Miscavige.
Yeah, and he still is the chairman of the board. That's what he calls himself, of RTC, or the Religious Technology Center.
Yes,
but at that time,
which, as you and I both know, is a bit of a joke because there's no one else on the board.
No,
you can't be a chairman if there's no one else there. By
there
definition of
there
board,
there are no board meetings.
Right. There's no board either. There's just a chairman.
Yeah. So anyway, but it was different then. I mean, RTC was just starting, so literally it was like 3 people.
Yes.
And so I was there to basically set up the approval. You know, I was going to be in charge of approving the evaluations from management, and also set up what was called the I'm not going to go into the term, but it was AVC, which was basically a management unit that would approve any communications from management, any publications or photos or printing, any evaluations, any programs. They had to be approved. And so they decided that RTC would be where that unit would be, and they pulled me into it to be in charge of it.
Okay. Which ironically, funny, you may or may not know this, but I was in that same unit for 4 years.
I didn't know that.
Doing the correction of the management executives. I was the C, authorization, verification, and correction. I was the correction person.
Yeah, that's right.
Years.
We had what you were called a cramming officer, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes,
you
which
basically
again, for people listening who don't know what we're talking about, in Scientology, cramming is where you take action on somebody not performing and either clear up what they don't understand, help them better understand Hubbard policies and also take corrective action. There's numerous different endless tools that you're expected to do. The bottom line is you're expected to make them, reform them so that they perform. There you go.
That's right. That's right. So anyway, I was the originator of that unit in RTC. So you eventually then became part of it years later.
Yeah,
but,
it's funny how our paths never crossed in Scientology, but now we're discovering.
Well, and I was gone before you ever got there.
Right. Yes.
So you and Mark have history. I mean, I was there that helped bring Mark up to the base.
Yes.
And we'll go over that story later. But you're like from whenever you came up to when you left, and I'm from 1981 till I left in 1990. So
yes, I arrived in 1991 and was there until 2005. So we're almost actually seamless in terms of the timeline.
Yeah, no real gap between the two of us. Anyway, so I was in the Religious Technology Center doing that, and at that time L. Ron Hubbard came back. He had been in hiding. And we turned out years later, we found out he was at a ranch in Creston, California, but we didn't know that at the time. So he'd been in hiding, but and he was out of communication with management and with everybody. He just was, the only communication line was every once in a while, and it was every once in a while between the people that were with him and David Miscavige, but it was very rare. But anyway, he decided to get back in communication because he wanted to get back to that location, the Golden Era Base, the headquarters, because he wanted to. It was a movie studio that he set up, and he wanted to shoot all of his movie scripts and do all of his music that he wanted to do to promote Scientology. So at the time, David Miscavige had, was reorganizing and getting rid of the Guardian's office, who had been convicted of, infiltrating the U.S. government, and setting up eventually the Office of Special Affairs. And so L. Ron Hubbard wanted to go, hey, I've been gone for 3 years. What's been happening with Scientology expansion? Well, a report was sent up about the statistics and all that. And Scientology had been expanding all over the world. I mean, they were opening up new organizations in Italy and Mexico and this and that. There were some really, lots of expansion going on. But anyway, for whatever reason, the way it was communicated to L. Ron Hubbard had been changed, and it got him very angry with management. And so he was being fed information by Miscavige and several others. And they basically decided we're going to get rid of all the people that are running senior management of the church, including people like David Mayo, who was the senior case supervisor international, the executive director international at the time, Bill Franks, the CO, the commanding officer of the management unit, his name was Kerry Gleason, and a whole bunch of people. So in Scientology, they have what's called a committee of evidence, which is kind of like a justice action, like if you were to go to court, but it's not really. We all know that.
I mean, no, it's more like guilty as charged. Here's your punishment.
Yeah, it's a kangaroo court. You're guilty. Exactly. All I have to do is charge you, and you're guilty, right?
Yes, well, but anyway, essentially, it's a court martial, but held by your peers.
Yeah.
To hurl accusations at you that you're presumed guilty of. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So anyway, so this was a big deal, that the first Religious Technology Center Ethics Order number 1 was a committee of evidence on all of these senior executives and technical people of Scientology. And they had all been brought up to the hidden base, international base, and they were on the grounds doing hard labor. You know what I mean? And they had been removed, and they were the scum of the earth and this and that, right? So then that had happened, like a month or two beforehand. And so then here's the committee of evidence, so they could basically get rid of them and declare them all suppressive people. Yes. Well, I had worked with a lot of these people when I was in Clearwater in management, and I knew that Scientology had expanded. And I was put on the committee as a jury member, just to make it easy for people listening. Yes. I was made part of the jury. I was like, there was a chairman, a secretary, and I think 3 other people that were jury members, and I was one of them. Okay.
Wow.
Well, I was
I
put
didn't know
on
that.
that. Yeah, I was put on that. But the problem was I didn't agree with what was going on. I went, L. Ron Hubbard has got to be he's got false information. These people that were, being tried were people that I knew, and I knew what they did. And so I was in disagreement. Well, I was being audited. I was being processed at the time. And of course, my disagreements were coming up in my auditing sessions.
Oh boy.
And so knowledge,
It's never a good day in Scientology when you disagree with what's going on.
yeah, because it's a kangaroo court. You're supposed to find
Yes.
them guilty. You're supposed to
Yes.
find them guilty, right? So
Yes.
anyway, so my disagreements were coming up in my processing sessions, and then knowledge reports were being written up about me. Okay. And then they were given to David Miscavige and people in RTC, and they went, we got a problem here with Fisher here. You know what I mean? So I was taken off the committee.
And sorry, so just for context, so what year was this?
This is 1982. This is November of 1982.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'd only been at the base permanently for about 3 months, right?
Okay.
So I was taken off the committee, put on doing manual labor around the golf course. And then eventually I was sent to the Rehabilitation Project Force, which at the time was in Los Angeles. Okay?
Yes, and again, for the audience listening, the Rehabilitation Project Force in the organization is the program by which it's essentially slave camp reprogramming efforts by Scientology, and it's extreme. And yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it was extreme, right? But at that time, it actually wasn't as terribly extreme as it became, because it still had the same rules where you couldn't speak to people, you had to run everywhere, you lived in separate berthing and nobody could talk to you and all that. That all was the same. But because so many people had been sent during that time period to the Rehabilitation Project Force at the complex in the Big Blue complex in LA.
Yes.
There was over 100 people in the RPF at that time.
Wow.
So, and we're talking highly trained, class 12, highest trained auditors, executives.
Some of the best Scientologists were all in
the world.
Slave camp.
We're all in the Rehabilitation Project Force. I mean, we're so big, we set up our own organization with our own treasury. Barbara Griffin, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Barbara Griffin was in the RPF, and she was in charge of our treasury. What that meant was they would do all the laundry for all the RPFers. At that time, we were doing the building out. Scientology was becoming computerized. And there was an organization we called it INCOM, which was our computerization. This is 1982. I mean, this is before PC, personal computers had even taken off. We were just starting. So we were building in the complex this whole area down on the first floor where we were going to have these huge mainframe computers where Scientology could be done. So we were down there working on that, right? Yeah. So our clothes were washed for us. I mean, we could have people go to the one person would go to the drugstore and buy things. I mean, it was palatial in comparison to where it had normally been, right? Wow. But at the time, like when you went to the Rehabilitation Project Force, you were supposed to learn how to process a twin. You would have somebody assigned to you, and your job was to get
just for clarification. Yeah. So essentially, you're learning how to do Scientology counseling, their version of therapy with another person to redeem yourself.
Right. And the counseling, Claire, is what's called security checking. It's basically getting off any crimes or high crimes or anything that you're withholding and and basically admitting them and getting them off, not just for yourself, but for the person that you're assigned to. And it's called a twin. You're basically trying to help each other get off, right?
The Scientological translation of a confession.
Confessional. Yes. That's correct. Yeah. Yes. So as part of graduating from the Rehabilitation Project Force, you had to get through your own confessional program, but also get the person you were assigned to, get them through theirs. Okay. But we had the added thing of, at that time, the running program, which is now called Superpower, but running program was just being piloted, just started. And that's a program I'm not going to go too much into detail, but basically you run around a pole for 12 hours a day in one direction, and the next day you run around a pole 12 hours a day the next day, right? And
Yes.
so we had to, because we were from the international base, it was required that we had to finish the running program before we could graduate from the RPF. Okay.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yes, this is the cause. Now it's referred to as the Cause Resurgence Rundown,
Yeah.
which Scientologists pay what I think $5,000 to
I
do
don't
in
know, but
Clearwater, Florida, because they have
yeah,
a whole floor of the Fort Harrison where it's fancy but it's the same program. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, by the way, because I know originally it was a reformation tool.
yeah. Well, let me let me just describe to it. We had to do the running program, and at the time we did it in Griffith Park, which is
Oh,
not far from the complex in Hollywood, right? And
yes.
we literally were in a dirt parking lot for the Greek Theater, which is an outdoor concert theater in Griffith Park in Los Angeles, right? And so every day we would drive out there and we would put up these oil drums that were all welded together, stand them up to be the pole that we ran around, and then we would run around the pole in one direction one day for 12 hours and went around the opposite way for 12 hours. We would
Did
get,
you
you could
did you
eat.
not have people stopping asking what the
Yeah,
heck you
yeah,
were doing?
yeah. I have all sorts of stories about that, but yeah, yeah. We're like, our
That's
short
not
story was
weird at
like we're
all.
training for a marathon,
Oh
because
my
there was a
gosh.
golf course right across the road, just literally across the street. And like we used to go to the snack bar to get snacks at the snack bar. And this is a funny story. Like one of the guys that we saw at the snack, was a Hollywood actor who was famous as the skipper on Gilligan's Island. His name
Oh
was
my
Alan
gosh.
Ladd. And
Yep.
he would be sitting there, he'd be there like 2 or 3 times a week, and we'd say hello to him and all that. So it was really funny. The funniest thing though was on Saturdays we couldn't run in the morning at that parking lot area because there were some local Mexican bullfighters who did their bullfighter training on that exact same spot. So they had a fake bull with horns that with a wheel on it, and they would run it around, and then the bullfighter would do his practical stuff. And the funniest thing, they would go like zumbale, zumbale. So we actually got a break for like 3 hours where we got to sit there and watch these Mexican bullfighters do their training
Wow.
in Griffith Park. Anyway, so we had to do it rain or shine too. So like if it was pouring rain, we didn't have raincoats. We took trash bags and put them over ourselves, and we had to run around in the rain. There was no stopping.
That's
So
crazy. And
anyway,
how many people were doing it with you?
probably 20, 25. All the people from
Wow.
Int who had been sent to the RPF, we had to do it
Wow.
until you finished. And I finished. It took me 51 days. I was on it for 51 days, and
12 hours a
so
day, 51
12 hours a
days.
day, 51 days. Yeah. The only positive was you had to get 8 hours of sleep, but you
Oh
were
yeah.
so sore from the running, and I got in tremendous shape. Don't get me
Yes.
wrong, right? But
Mark did it at the Hemet Base.
yeah, and I hate to say this, and I look, and I don't know, I can't assign anything towards Scientology with this, but I got a lot of gains out of running around that pole. Now, I think people have told me that it's like a runner's high, like there's marathon. I know you do running,
I
but there's
run. I
people.
don't run around any poles, but
Oh no, but you do running, right? And
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 I
you've done mini
absolutely agree with that.
marathons or 10Ks, right? Right? Have you done like,
Yep. I've done
yeah,
both. Sorry, hold on here. Oh, there we go. I have done both.
yeah,
But I hike up a mountain every day, and
yeah,
there's absolute truth. I personally wouldn't attribute that. There's definitely a runner's high. It's
yeah.
absolutely, you can ask my whole family. In fact, they'll tell you I'm a grouch if I haven't done my running.
Yeah, no, I dig it because the thing is obviously when you first start, you get so sore. Literally, I had shin splints. You were crawling and walking because you
Ouch.
couldn't, but they had to keep running. There was a supervisor there, and all they had to say was keep running, keep running. And if you took a
Yes.
break, it would be like, continue running. That's all they would say. And at the end of the day, you had to write up, what happened to you and what thoughts you had and things like that, right?
Yeah.
To a case supervisor.
Funny crossover of our stories here. In 1995, I was supposed to be in charge of that program in Hemet at the
Oh, no kidding.
headquarters. So I read all of the Hubbard
orders, advices.
advices,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
that where he outlined the program. But either way, neither here nor there. Go ahead and finish.
But when I did it, I got to the point where I could run and I could run, and I literally felt like I was floating on air when I ran. You may have experienced this, but I didn't even feel my feet. You know what I mean? You would just run in a circle, and you were just so blown out. In Scientology terms, you're blown out of your brains, right? And like I said, I've been told that it's like a runner's high, but I literally could not feel my feet, and I could run and run until I was breathing hard, and then I would slow down and stop, and I lost weight. I just was feeling great.
Yes.
So I was at this time, what was this, 1982? So I was like 24 years old, so I was young and all that. So anyway, so I finished the running program, and then I also the person I was assigned to, we both finished our confessionals, right, which we had to train and do our own thing. So we graduated from the rehabilitation project force. You're not going to believe this. We went in Thanksgiving of 1982. I graduated in April of 1983. So I was in 4 months. 4 months,
so
including 2 months on the running program.
Yeah, and cut to current, it takes,
years.
Years. My uncle was on the rehabilitation project force for 10 years.
I know. I couldn't believe it when after I left, there was no internet at first and all that. And then when we started connecting to people who left after us, they told me that Chuck Beatty told me he'd been on the RPF for 7 years. What?
Yes.
That's insane.
It is
It's insane to go on the RPF in the first place, but 7 years.
Yes.
I mean, 4 months I thought was like, that's a long time, but not compared to 7 or 10 years. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Totally.
And then what I heard, the reason was that happened was because Miscavige changed it from read the information from Hubbard, drill it so you know how to do it, and then do it, to you had to get a video pass. I'm getting way into the weeds here. In order to be able to process your twin in the RPF. It was insanity.
That was one of many things that he added. But either way, we'll get back to your story here.
Yeah, I know. I'm just sorry. This is
no,
for you and me. We're just enjoying this. But anyway,
sure.
So I graduated the Rehabilitation Project Force, and then while I was on there, I had met Terry Gamboa, and she had been the David Miscavige had been put into a corporation. They set up a corporation for L. Ron Hubbard called Author Services Incorporated, and it was a for-profit corporation for all of his literary works, his movies, his this and that, so that he could get paid. L. Ron Hubbard could get paid his royalties and that type of thing, and not have problems with the IRS, right?
Yes. So
when they set that unit up, Miscavige was put in there as the chairman of the board of Author Services, and Terry Gamboa was the executive director of Author Services. And there was about 20 senior Sea Org members who were in there as executives. Now they had to leave the Sea Org during that time because they had to be paid at least minimum wage, and they got paid way more than that. They got minimum wage plus bonuses, and they were talking huge bonuses. So
sorry, just to pause for a second there.
Yeah.
What do you mean by leave the Sea Org? Because
they were no longer Sea Org members for that time period that they were at Author Services. Okay.
Really? Because
currently they weren't
services. They're not required to leave the Sea organization.
I don't know exactly how it all worked, so I may be speaking out of school, but basically they were no longer getting paid. By the way, you guys were getting paid $46 a week, right?
Yes.
When I got in the Sea organization, we got $17.20. Okay, and every Saturday we go get our $17.20, and on the invoice would be 2 dimes taped to the invoice along with the $17. So you got $17.20.
Yes.
And then it went up to eventually $30 while I still was in the Sea organization. And then of course it went up to whatever you guys got, but it was nothing.
No.
But I was funny. I'd never forget $17.20. And if you were on half pay, you got whatever it was, $7.60 or whatever.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I know. Seriously.
Anyway, I digress, but back to,
so back to ASI.
So they got paid. They had to be paid because it was a for-profit place, right?
Right.
So
which is the same to this day.
Right. And so Miscavige was getting paid way more money than anybody in the Sea organization and
Yes.
anybody working at Author Services. So I met Terry on the running program. I'd never met her, and she had been removed from her position at Author Services, and she was on the running program with me. I
Oh,
also was
wow.
on the running program with Suzette Hubbard.
Okay.
Okay. L. Ron
And
Hubbard's
Suzette
daughter.
Hubbard, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and she was put on the running program, and that's when I became friends with Suzette. So there were people, not just RPFers, people from the Rehabilitation Project Force on the running program. So that's where I met them. So when I graduated, Terry was assigned to renovate the spaces on Sunset Boulevard where Author Services offices were at the time. And so she was put in charge of that. And then so she took me and 3 other people who had just graduated the RPF, and then we were in charge of handling all the logistics of getting the materials and that type of thing. So I did that for about 3 months. We got all the Author Services renovated, and then I was
And
sent
this
back.
is 1983.
83, yeah.
Okay.
So then I was sent back to Florida to do the evaluation stuff that I did before with management. I was out there until about mid 1984, and then Vicki Asnaran, who was a person in charge of the Religious Technology Center at the time, and she was a champion of me at the time. Anyway, she had me pulled back up to the international base, and then I was there until I left in September 1990.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were back there from 1984 at the headquarters in Gilman Hot Springs.
1983. Sorry,
okay.
It was the summer of '83.
Okay.
So yeah, because I graduated April '83. Then I was in Clearwater for a short period of time, where I did the Author Services renovations, and then I was But anyway, yeah. So like summer of '83, I came back up to the international base. Now things had changed quite a bit. I mean, there were a lot more people up there then, and the conditions were a little bit better, and that type of thing. But so I was up there.
And you resumed a position in Religious Technology Center.
Yes, in the authorization, verification, and correction, I was put back in charge of that.
Okay.
So I was in there, and then in October of 1983, L. Ron Hubbard, wrote, what they call them advices, but that was basically an order to David Miscavige, and he was the chairman of the board of Author Services at the time, okay? But he also was in charge of what was called the special unit that was basically reorganizing the church corporately, for tax purposes, and also handling all the legal affairs to get an all clear so that L. Ron Hubbard could come out of hiding and come back to the Int Base to do his movies and all that type of thing.
And the all clear was to essentially resolve any and all outstanding legal pending actions against Scientology and against Hubbard.
Right. And the goal was to get L. Ron Hubbard back to the international base so he could do his research. Trust me, I'm talking because we were true believers at the time, but to do his movies, to do his music, his audio recordings, all that stuff. Right.
Yes.
So, Miscavige, though, because he was at Author Services, he was no longer in the Church of Scientology International or the corporation of the Church of Scientology. But that didn't matter. He still ordered into Scientology nonstop from his position in Author Services, which was a complete violation of the corporate structure. And the IRS would be, and the government would be very unhappy about that. And of course, L. Ron Hubbard, the whole time while he was in hiding, he ordered into everything. It didn't matter, even though he's trying to, maintain distance and that type of thing. He ordered into everything, and his hands were involved with everything. And of course, everybody in Scientology and the Sea organization knew that, right?
Yes, of course.
But they were trying to put on a facade for the IRS and the government. Okay.
Yes, it's been a recurring theme for many decades, evidently, because
that's right. And you were talking about inurement the other night on your thing. That was what the IRS was going after L. Ron Hubbard at the time, basically saying that he was financially benefiting from the money that Scientology was making. And then that all Scientology was trying to prove was no, he's not. All he's getting is his royalties from his books. Meanwhile, he was getting millions of dollars. It was such crap.
Yes. Okay? For sure.
Anyway, I say all this only because in October of 1983, L. Ron Hubbard sent David Miscavige dispatch to set up a corporate liaison office. Okay.
Okay.
And the corporate liaison office, it was his idea to be a facility for David Miscavige and for author services, so that they had somebody inside the church corporation that could coordinate between author services and their interests having to do with movies and books and lectures and all that, and Scientology church, right?
Yes.
So, and that he said also this corporate liaison office could also handle David Miscavige's laundry, his administrative services, and all that, of course, can be paid for by the church, not by author services and L. Ron Hubbard, right?
Yes.
So that's how that came to be. Vicky Asnaran, who was the head of RTC, recommended me to be the first person to be in charge and set up that office.
Okay.
And that's how I got to be that position.
Okay. And so again, this was within Religious Technology Center.
Yeah. Not yeah, exactly. In Religious Technology Center, but not in ASI, Author Services.
Right.
And that was in October 1983. Okay. And so my first job, of course, then was to get personnel for it. I got 3 people, and then I had to renovate. I'm sure you remember the office that when you first got there in 91, DM's office was like gray with the blue. It was kind of a high tech. It was up in the middle villa.
Yes.
And the corporate liaison office was attached to it. I did all that. I got the renovations done. I got the furniture built out in Los Angeles and installed. I set all that up, the copiers, that was all my baby. And then I had a girl, Jackie Parman, who
Yes.
Was the administrative person, and she worked directly with Shelly.
Okay.
And then I was basically Dave's liaison into gold, because he didn't want me involved with management. He wanted to go straight into the, Mark Yeager and the EDN and all that. He wanted to go. He didn't care about that. He wanted me there because at that time he was mostly in Los Angeles. He didn't come out to the Gold Base very often, maybe 1 or 2 weekends a month, if that. So he wanted somebody there that he could say, hey, what's happening with the movie shoot, or what's happening with the lectures, and I was basically his eyes and ears, and I'd be the one carrying out his commands. Okay. So I that's what I did. We also oversaw all of the renovation of all of the L. Ron Hubbard offices and Bonneview, the house at the time, so that we were getting everything ready for L. Ron Hubbard's return.
And so when you say the L. Ron Hubbard offices, you're talking at each single organization all over the world?
No, I'm talking at the Gold Base. L. Ron Hubbard, he had an office in the Upper Villa.
Yes.
Okay. He had an office down by the Cine Studio down by MCI.
Yes.
He had an office in the recording area over what was called the RAV, or Senior LRH Recording and Archive, up there. He had several offices there.
It begs the question, how many offices does one guy need on one property?
I think he had 4 or 5. He also had a gun room for all of his weapons. He had guns. He was a gun collector. He had a files room. He had, of course, Bonneview, which was the house that he and Mary Sue were going to live in.
Yes.
So he had all these spaces. And so I ran 2 people and that did all the renovations and got all of those things up to snuff. I also oversaw all of the audio lines. I mean, L. Ron Hubbard's lectures were mixed, at the Gold Base. It was the Int Base then, but it was Gold Base. We had recording studios. I oversaw the building of the music studio, that from the ground up. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
the big,
it's one of the buildings in the San Jacinto property.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's huge. We built that from the ground up, and I was in charge. I mean, there were people who did the actual supervising, but I caught hell if it wasn't moving on time. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I understand.
So I basically, because Miscavige could rely on me, I was, to him, I was saving him a lot of time and effort, because he'd get upset about something and I could take it, because I got to the point where, I'm sure you've seen this before, but where I realized that he wasn't yelling. When he was upset, he wasn't upset at me. He was upset about the situation, and I could handle him and say, I'll take care of it, sir. I've got it. I'll take care of it. And then I go and I take care of it. Right. So I had a reputation for getting things done. And I actually was like the good cop. like where he'd be the bad cop going into areas and, you know, ripping people's faces off and doing all this stuff and cross ordering everything. He'd leave, and then I go and I'd sit down with the person. I said, okay, let's figure out how we can get this done. And then we would do that. So that's what happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
then we also handled obviously his domestic stuff. I had Marty Rathman's first wife, Jeray Rathman. She was in LA handling the stuff with DM and Shelly in LA. And then I had Jackie up here, and then later Liana Klingler was in there. You probably know these people.
I do, yes. But
yeah.
so let me ask you, so was this the position?
And Jason Bennick?
Yes. Gosh, we could do an episode just dedicated to Jason Bennick. Oh my goodness. But so in all of this, I'm going to lead into some of the additional pictures that you gave.
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
When is this the position that you were on when you met and married your wife at that time?
Yeah.
Okay. So you ready for me to add this in here?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what I looked like back then. I don't look like this old fat fart I am now. That's my wife.
Stop.
That's our wedding day. That's at the Star of California, which was that the Clipper ship swimming pool on the property.
Yes, because it's not weird at all to have a ship on a property in the middle of the desert, right?
Yeah. But that's Julie. Her name's Julie Caetano, and now she's Julie Schluss. But we got married in October 1984. Okay. And the funny thing is that wedding, it actually, David Miscavige, I asked him to be the minister, and I asked a couple other people to be involved in the wedding party, and they were going to do it, but this is a whole nother story. I'm just briefly mentioned. It happened to be that they decided to set up the International Association of Scientologists, which is the big membership organization for Scientology where all the money eventually was going. And so they decided to have the initial signing event at St. Hill in England, where they set it all up. And it was the day of my wedding. So they couldn't be in my wedding party. So they left.
Well, here's a crazy crossover for you. I was at that signing event at St. Hill in UK. I was 9 years old.
I was going to say, you had to be a little girl, but that was my wedding day. Yeah.
Wow.
That was my wedding day.
Okay, so I'll go to the next picture, and maybe you can just walk us through.
Okay.
So this is your wedding group, right?
This is our wedding party. Yeah, we got married on a Sunday because people could get off work in the morning, so we got married on a Sunday, and then people went back to work, But left to right, the men, that's Jason Bennick on the end. Yep. The next guy in with the tan skin, that's Andre Tabayoyan.
Wow. Okay.
And then the next guy in is Jesse Prince.
Okay. And these were all executives in religious technology
in RTC,
center at that
but like
time.
Andre Tabayoyan, he was the guy that I was in the States that was doing all the renovation of the L. Ron Hubbard spaces. Okay. Jason Bennick worked for me in the corporate liaison office.
Okay.
Jesse Prince was in RTC, and he was a senior executive in RTC.
Yes.
The next guy is John McGinley, with the beard.
Yes.
And he in Clearwater years before, he'd been the most senior position in the Sea Org, used to be the LRH personal communicator. Okay. It was called the PersCom, right? Well, he was the LRH personal communicator for several years, and then he got busted and he was sent to gold. And anyway, so we were friends.
And that's the person responsible for handling all public relations for.
No. It wasn't that. He actually literally was the person between L. Ron Hubbard and anybody. Any communication going to L. Ron Hubbard went through him. So it was a very powerful position. And they got rid of it when they did the reorganization. This is all before.
Which explains why I have no idea about that.
It is all before your time. But anyway, he'd been a very powerful guy, and he was a really good guy. And so that's John McGinley. Then the guy in next with the little goatee, his name was Hans Heinrich Peterson, I think. He was my cramming officer in the corporate liaison office. We also had a correction function. Yes. And then the next guy next to me is Gary Conley. You probably know him, right?
Yes, he was famously always the henchman.
Yeah. And then on the women's side, of course, I'm standing next to Julie, my wife. Yes. The little girl is Roanne Hubbard, Roanne Horwich. That's L. Ron Hubbard's granddaughter.
Wow.
And she was the flower girl. She was being raised on the base at the time.
Yes.
And then the women moving from my wife going to the right. The first one's Lisa Allen, Lisa Schroer. who I
Okay.
heard years later became the commanding officer of the Golden Era Productions. I
Yes,
guess.
she did.
Yeah, at the time she was the receptionist at the Commodore's Messenger org. She basically answered the phones.
Okay.
And then next to her is Carol Burke,
Oh, yeah.
who was Mark Yeager's communicator. Mark Yeager was the commanding officer of the Commodore's Messenger Organization and the Watchdog Committee, and that was his communicator. Then next to
Yes.
her is a girl named Jenny Reitman. She worked for me later. She was in Commodore's Messenger org, but later she worked for me. And then next to her with the dark hair is Fleur Thomas, and she is Larice Stukenbrock's sister and Darnell Bloomberg's sister.
Yes.
From New Zealand.
Yes. I worked with Fleur in Religious Technology Center for 8 years. Yes.
Yeah. Then next to her with the blonde hair, that's Jackie True Parman. I don't know what her last name is now, I forget. But anyway, she was in my office, in the corporate liaison. Yeah, she was in my corporate liaison office. And then next to her on the end is Michelle Yeager. That was Mark Yeager's wife, who I think is Jara Milo is her maiden name.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's all those people.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
and
we got you know, we saved our money and got tuxedos, and the girls got dresses. So.
And you had 2 hours to get married and then go back to work.
No, we didn't. We got to go on our honeymoon.
You did?
Yes,
really?
We did. Yeah, we went to San Diego for 2 days and came back.
Wow, you high roller, you. 2 days in San Diego. Oh my goodness. I got called back after 3 hours, so yeah.
Well, right, I have to tell you, just so you know, I mean, and you probably know when you were in RTC, maybe they didn't have it, but we got bonuses in RTC, and because Miscavige was getting, paid really well in bonuses and author services, when he in 1986, when he came over to RTC, Religious Technology Center, there's no way he was taking a pay cut, so they set up a bonus system in the Religious Technology Center, and he got huge bonuses there. And of course, he couldn't be the only one getting bonuses in those days, so we all got bonuses too. So I was not as hand to mouth as other Sea Org members. I had money,
Yes, well,
I made money.
Yeah, and I'll say, while I was in Religious Technology Center, there were 3 times that I received a small bonus, but compared to $46, it was sizable. But
absolutely. But I mean, I got like $1,300 bonuses. Do you know what I mean? Like that was like a ton of money.
Yes.
And then we would get end of the year bonuses based on how much Sea Org reserves increased, and DMs, of course, and Shelly's had to be huge. So then we all, and this was all cover for the Internal Revenue Service.
Yes,
in other words,
absolutely.
I'm sure years later he probably changed it, but once they had the IRS exemption, but we got paid. So I mean, shoot, I remember at one point in my bank account I had over $26,000 that I gotten paid in bonuses. Now that's completely unusual in the Sea Org.
Very much
but
so.
Everybody in RTC at that time, the executives, they were all getting the same.
It's interesting you say that, because at one point, Miscavige had re-implemented weekly bonuses, but only for the staff in his office.
Of course.
Yeah, just for him and Shelly and Larice and his personal staff. Never for anybody else. But okay.
Well, and then what was bad too is that all of a sudden, sometimes you'd be like, you have to pay back your bonuses if based on you did something wrong, or you got in ethics trouble. Oh, you're going to pay back that bonus you just got. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
But
okay.
Yeah, I was fortunate to get that anyway.
Yes, and so this was
October 1984.
Okay, October 1984. Okay, perfect.
And I am 26 years old there.
Okay. All right, and then here's the next picture that we have.
That's Julie and me, and I was a minister of the Church of Scientology, like everybody that was there at the time, and I had to perform a wedding for somebody. I did it 2 times. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then let's see here.
We were married for 6 years, Julie and I. Yeah.
Okay. So 1984 until 1990.
When I left. Okay. That's why, when I left, that's a whole nother story. I wanted her to come with me, and they anyway, we'll get to that.
Yes, for sure.
So this is John Travolta and me. That was 1986. That was like March of 1986, and it was after L. Ron Hubbard died in January. They decided to do the Road to Freedom music album. and have it ready by March 13th for L. Ron Hubbard's birthday. So we had 30 days to arrange and record all of the music for the Road to Freedom album and get it produced in cassette and in vinyl and do all the marketing and the whole bit. And we only had 30 days to do it to make the deadline. And we worked around the clock, and I was basically the assistant producer on the album. Miscavige was there the whole time as well. And we worked around the clock. But anyway, John Travolta came and he performed on the album. It sounds terrible now, but at the time we were really proud of it.
Yeah. Understood. All right. I'm going to remove this for now.
Okay.
Get back to, okay. So that's that. And so let's talk about how you got out of there and what.
All right. I'll keep it short. I mean, I was in Miscavige's good graces doing his work. And then in 1987, he took over Religious Technology Center. They got rid of the brokers, Pat and Annie Broker, who had been with L. Ron Hubbard when he died and had been with him for years. He got rid of them. That's a whole nother story. It's a long story. But Miscavige came in and totally kicked everybody out of the Religious Technology Center and brought in his own people.
Yes.
And I had to do the organization board. I had to do I did all the paperwork as part of that to set up that organization. Anyway,
would you say it's fair to say that Miscavige systematically removed anyone that had any power, any authority over him within Scientology?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. At that time, because see, like I left in 1990, and of course they didn't get the tax exemption until 1993, right?
Yes.
At the time when I was there, they were still afraid of the IRS because the IRS, they didn't have the exemption, and they still wanted to have, keep on, he did at least keep the airs of, we're still separate corporations, we do this, I'm not in charge, we got watchdog committee and we've got an executive director. I mean, it's all bullshit. Yes. But basically they wanted to keep that. So he got rid of people who potentially could take over for him. Okay. And that started with the RTC takeover in 1987.
Yes.
And it continued obviously up until today.
Yes.
So yeah, that did go on. But anyway, I'll jump forward. So I basically held that position, and, Miscavige, liked me and all that. But then in, late 89, I think it was around late 89, he started when he started attacking me personally. Okay. Yes. Like, in other words, like, instead of like him being upset about something, he'd be upset at me and, you should have handled this and you this and you that. He would make me go do, menial stuff, you know what I mean? As punishment. And then I got removed temporarily and put on, grounds work, just, while I got confessional cleanup, and did ethics conditions and all that for about 2-3 months. Okay. And then eventually I worked my way where I got put back on that same position, and
did he physically abuse you?
No, later.
Okay.
Yeah, later.
Okay. I was just curious because obviously I
was one of the first people he ever beat up. Yeah.
I see. Okay. I'll let you get to that. I just wanted to make sure we weren't missing something, but go ahead.
No, that's okay. So in early, it should have been like around early 90s or whatever, early 1990s, sorry. My wife, Julie, was the Watchdog Committee member over Golden Era Productions, the movie studio, right?
Yes.
And she had been for several years. Anyway, for whatever reason, she got sent to the rehabilitation project force, right? Out at another property that we owned that we called Happy Valley. I think you guys call it something different, but it was about, 15, 20 miles.
We just called it HV, Happy Valley.
HV, Happy Valley. So she got sent to the RPF without a committee of evidence, like without a justice action. It was completely against L. Ron Hubbard policy. Yep. You're supposed to, if you're going to the rehabilitation project force, there's supposed to be a committee of evidence to send you. So she got sent, and I thought it was complete BS. You know what I mean? That it happened because I dealt with her all the time, and I was not happy about it. And
understandably,
I suspected that Miscavige was behind it because he did things behind your back, and then you would find out about it later.
Yes, and he
So
also had a penchant for destroying people's relationships by my
yeah,
experience later.
yeah. Well, so then around she was in the RPF out at Happy Valley, and about a month into it, we got word that Miscavige pulled me outside, and he said, Mark, I need you to go out and handle Julie because she wants to leave the Sea Org. Okay.
Okay.
And you need to do me a personal favor and handle her so that she'll stay. And of
Wow.
course, at the time, I wasn't thinking about going anywhere, but I was not happy about her being in the RPF anyway, right?
Yes.
So this is a big mistake of mine because I should have said, "Hey, I had a car. Let's get in the car and go."
Right.
You know what I mean? So anyway, but
Yeah.
it turned out I didn't know this at the time, but Julie had been Miscavige's girlfriend before he got together with Shelly.
Oh, I did not
Okay.
know that either.
Yeah, so they had been an item for a while before that. So he didn't want her going anywhere. I
I
found this
see.
out later.
Yep.
Anyway, so I went and I handled Julie to stay, you know. And then in May of 1990, her brother, who was not a Scientologist, was getting married in San Diego, and we got permission to go to the wedding. And she was in the RPF, but
Okay.
because I was going with her, and also her brother is Kevin Caetano,
Who is
who
the
later
security
became the
chief?
head of security. He was a security guard, but
Okay.
years later became head of security. He was going with us, okay, and also, but they weren't worried about me. They didn't want Julie going anywhere. So
Yes.
we drove in my car down to the wedding. At the same time, there was obviously something going on at the Gold Base with the audio production of cassette tapes. Now, Mark was there at the base then. He had just come up shortly before that. As a matter of fact, I was overseeing the Sea Org mission that was bringing technicians up to the base, and
My husband Mark.
your husband, Mark, yeah. And I don't remember him from that time because he just literally was there maybe a month or two before I finally left, right?
Okay.
And he was 16 years old, I think, at the time. I mean, I just don't remember him. But anyway, so
Yes.
we had a high-speed copy line that produced L. Ron Hubbard's lectures, and it was on cassette tape. Anyway, Miscavige, out of his idiocy for our standards have to be super duper high, we can't have something that sounds anywhere terrible. Only to his ear would it sound terrible, and anybody else it would sound just fine, right?
Right.
He made gold get rid of over $300,000 worth of already produced cassette tapes because the line wasn't okay. The production line, the copying line was not okay to him. So he
Yep.
basically just shit canned, sorry, excuse my French,
No, you're good.
all that money and that tape. So we were up for hours. This is before I went to the wedding. Technicians up there, a guy named Gary Liu, a guy named Bruce Plotz, and all these people up there trying to get the line to basically produce a high enough quality. I'm not going to go into the details, but a high enough standard duplicate of the original that David Miscavige would go, okay, this is now okay. So
Yes.
it wasn't going very well. So anyway, when we went to the wedding, Miscavige was at the Free Winds at the ship for an event, right?
Yeah.
So on the way back from the wedding, Shelly paged me, beeped me. Okay, we didn't have, this is before cell phones or anything. I had a beeper that went beep. If it beeped one time, that was DM, two times Shelly, three times my office. I hated a beeper. Anyway, so it beeped and I had to call her. So I'd pull over, find a payphone and call. And she said, Fisher, you need to get back here right now, because we didn't think the Miscavige was coming back for a couple of days. She goes, he's on his way back right now. He'll be here tonight, and the high-speed copy line is still not working.
Oh boy.
So I went, okay, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. So I'm driving back, and I've been with my wife for the last day of the wedding, and I really loved being with my wife. And I just basically, I went, what am I doing here? So I decided to leave. So on the way home, I didn't tell my wife. So when we got back to the base, I dropped her off at Happy Valley. I came back to my room
Yeah.
in the Middle Villas, got a bag, threw stuff in it, got in the car, drove off the base. And of course, I had privileges of going anywhere I wanted to because I worked for David Miscavige. And the security said, hey, sir, where are you going? I said, I'm just going into town. I went and got some cash, and then I took off.
Wow.
Blowing is
And
escaping.
and just to help people understand, because I have similar similar experiences in my story. I'm sure you probably wanted to tell your wife, but
Yeah, but
most
she turned me
likely,
in.
right, exactly, exactly. And I think that's important to note because, again, like I said, Scientology loves to accrue leverage on people, and also makes it so you cannot have open communication with anyone. So I
Yeah,
just think it's an important thing to note. I'm sure.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
But I had an ulterior motive. I
Okay,
wanted to blow, and so that they would have to put me in the RPF with my wife.
I see.
I escaped with the intention of coming back a few days later
Yep,
and then going to and be in the RPF with my wife.
I
I didn't
see.
want to be separated from her anymore,
Okay.
right? So my intention was that it wasn't to get away for good, right? So
Yes.
I did. I took off, and I knew, of course, I knew how they chase people down and all that. So I checked into the best hotels, not a motel. I had money. I paid cash for everything under an assumed name, so they couldn't follow me. And
Yes.
then anyway, I went to the South Coast Plaza Mall. I bought black T-shirts, black jeans, all the clothes I would need in the RPF because you had to wear black. I bought all the stuff I needed. I went to a few movies to, because I'm not going to see any movies in a long time. And then I
Yes.
called them up and I said, okay, listen, I'm coming back. And I told her I'll go right to the RPF. And apparently, I found out later that Miscavige was going like, I'm going to send his ass to the RPF when he gets back. But when he found out I wanted to go to the RPF, he went, well, that's too good for him. So instead, I got back to the base, and they put me on grounds. It's a 600-acre property, and I was made the deputy de-weeder, never to be posted as the de-weeder in charge. And they put out an issue to everybody in the base, basically to slap me down because I was highly respected. And
Wow.
yeah,
So, and
so
of course, Miscavige figured, oh, I get it. The reason you want to do the
so you never get
rehabilitation
what you
project
wanted.
force,
Yeah,
no, is so
no,
you can be with your wife,
yeah. I
and
was
it
told, no,
was
it's too
intent,
good for you.
right? But no,
Anyway,
I'm positive it was 100% his intention to destroy your relationship, and I'm that's
I know it was, but
yeah.
I absolutely, because see, when I came back, they turned Julie against me. I mean, I only been gone for 5 days, but obviously they filled her head with all sorts of lies, and she wouldn't talk to me. And we'd been
Wow.
together for 6 years, and we'd never had a fight. We'd always gotten along. There was never any problem. We loved each other. But basically, when I came back, I was, in her eyes, persona non grata. I mean, she would not speak to me. She was so
Ugh.
upset, probably because I didn't bring her with me, to be honest with you, but who knows?
Yeah, yeah, I could see both sides of that, having been on both sides of that.
Yeah.
But
So
nonetheless, there's no
so anyway,
doubt
so
in
I
my
came
mind
back,
that
and
she was filled with lies.
yeah. So
She was fed poison.
I'll move forward real quickly. So basically, I came back, and I was gonna, all right, fine, I'll tough it out, no problem. But then they put out an issue canceling everything I'd ever done in Scientology, all my courses, all my auditing, everything. They put out an issue to everybody on the base, canceling all the years of training I'd done and everything. And that crushed me because I was a dedicated Scientologist. And I went like, you know what, if I got to start over, why am I doing it here? If I got to start over, I may as well do it outside. I mean, literally, that put that in my mind. And then I queried it. I sent up a query saying, hey, this violates several L. Ron Hubbard policies, and it got
Yes,
denied. So at that point, I realized that David Miscavige was not playing by the same rules that the rest of us were.
right.
Okay.
He never
I
has been, but
realized that
yes.
he was not following the policies, even though L. Ron Hubbard was dead. And we all thought L. Ron Hubbard was coming back. That's how crazy we were indoctrinated.
Right.
So basically I went, he's not playing the same as we are. And then shortly thereafter, of course, I was getting, security checked and all that. I still was voicing that, I still had thoughts of leaving, but that if I left, I was going to sue David Miscavige. I wasn't going to sue Scientology, but David Miscavige, he's going to get it, right?
Good
So I was
touch.
So this is when he physically attacked me. I was working in the garage that was being renovated at the time, and I was up on one of those big scissors lifts that lifts you up on the ceiling, and I was painting pipes. Okay. And he came walking through with his little entourage that he normally had with him. And
Shelly, Larice, the usual
no, there was no
suspects.
Larice then. It was,
Oh,
at that time, it was Mark Gangber,
okay.
um, and the guys from two guys from the States. And
Okay.
apparently Mark Mark Headley was in the garage because he saw this happen, and a couple other people saw it happen. I just didn't notice them, right?
Yes.
And so anyway, he called up to me. He said, "Hey, Fisher," and he goes, he said, "Do you still want to leave the Sea Org?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "You do?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Why?" And I said, "Freedom." Now, I'd never talked back to Miscavige once, ever, you know.
Yes.
So I was up there and I said, "Freedom." He goes, "Freedom?" I said, "Yeah, freedom to choose and do what I want to do and be who I want to be." And he said to me, "You're a bypass case." Okay. Now in Scientology, bypass case means that Scientology processing did not work on you. Okay. And I was
Yes.
at the top of the Scientology bridge. I was on my OT7. You know,
Wow. Okay.
I'd done everything except for, gone on to OT8. And I
So
was still
essentially, he's telling you that you didn't attain anything.
anything, nothing.
Yep.
And they had already canceled everything anyway, right?
Right.
And I said, "No, you're a bypass case because you don't understand what I'm talking about." Which is backflash. You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. You don't say that
There's
to
no
an
talking back in
There is no
Scientology,
talking back.
especially not to Miscavige.
No, no. And he had other people around him. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
I made him look bad,
Yes.
So he ordered me, "Get down off of that lift right now." And of course, I came down off of the lift. As soon as I got off the lift, he came at me and he grabbed me around the throat. And I immediately, because I knew he was probably going to do something like this, I went limp and I went down on the ground. Okay. Now, I'm a big guy now, but I wasn't a big guy then. You've seen the pictures of me, right? I was
Yes.
a lot smaller then, right? But my intention was to have the other people around see how crazy he was. I literally knew that he was crazy.
Yes.
Okay. And I wanted them to see this is nuts. This is not why we got involved in Scientology. We were not here to beat people up or hurt
Right.
people. We're here to help people.
Yes.
So anyway, I went down. He was kicking me, pulling my hair and all that sort of stuff. He got done. I don't know how long it lasted. And then I stood up and I pointed my finger right at him. And I said, "You notice I didn't lay one finger on you because I wanted everybody to see that I didn't fight back."
Yes.
And then I reached behind my head and because I felt something warm and I pulled it out and it was blood. It made my head blood by pulling my hair. I said, "You made my head bleed," you know? And then of course he goes like, "Well, it's for your own good and this and that, and I'll get the medical officer down to see you," and blah, blah, blah. And he scurried off. So that's when he physically attacked me. And that's why I knew that, he has gone crazy. Now I'd been with him and I'd seen everything. So I knew what was going on behind the scenes. Most staff members didn't know this stuff, but anyway, but that he attacked me. So I was like, okay. Anyway, I'm going to jump ahead because I can get really long-winded. But anyway, shortly thereafter, I still was there staying, right? But then we had the big flood, which I'm sure you've heard about, that happened in August
1990.
Right? August 1990, before the Sea Org Day. I was working out, doing all of the sports fields, putting in the soccer field and the softball field and the basketball court, all that, out by the G units and all that. That's where I was. I was on the estates doing that work. And anyway, a flood happened, wiped out the G units. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were coming, yada, yada, yada. We all got in trouble. That night,
because of course, when a flood happens in the desert in California, it's the staff's fault.
Oh, it's Gold's fault.
Right.
It's not an act of God.
No, it's not. Has nothing to do with nature.
This was a 100-year flood. I mean, literally, the whole side of the mountain that was next to our property flooded across, including rocks and mud and boulders. Right.
Yes.
Anyway, and we had built they'd built up these berms and stuff like that, so the water just channeled right across all the sports fields and through the G's. Anyway, it was a nightmare. So that night, I mean, we were wading through mud, and luckily nobody got killed.
Right.
Okay? That night, he calls a muster, like a group gathering down at the mess hall. It's a guy in Massachusetts Inn, and he has all the Gold staff stand up in front, and everybody's there. And he came out and he just told everybody it was Gold's fault. He was literally foaming at the mouth like a rabid dog.
I've seen him do it.
And I was standing next to Paul Grady, Janice Grady's husband.
Yes.
And we both were on estates. We didn't even talk to each other, but we both had the same thought of like, this guy has lost his mind and we're getting the fuck out of here. Okay. So that night I still had my car and I lived in town. So I said, "Oh, I'm, going to drive town." They let me drive out. It wasn't as hard for somebody like me to get out. And I took off. Okay. Well, lo and behold, Paul and Janice Grady left that exact same night and never came back.
Oh,
They
wow.
went out at the Kirby Apartments. They loaded their stuff up. I had no idea, and they had no idea I was going. They took off. So I went to my sister's house in Hollywood because I had no idea. I was going crazy. You know, at that time you're spinning in. You don't know if it's you or you're going crazy, right?
Yes.
So I ended up at my sister's because she was a public Scientologist. I didn't know where to go. And I was exhausted, so I went to sleep. By the time I woke up, Mike Sutter from Religious Technology Center was at the door to come get me and bring me back to the Gold Base.
Wow.
So,
yep.
Security drove my car back, and then I drove back with Mike. And he made a classic mistake. He told me, he said, Janice and Paul Grady left last night too, Blue. And that's when I realized, you know what? I'm not crazy.
Yes.
I'm not the only one who sees this, because you're not allowed, you're not allowed to talk amongst each other.
Right. You can never compare notes or say anything negative or even.
So that's when I decided, as soon as I can, I'm leaving for good. My birthday happened at the end of August. Julie wouldn't talk to me. She didn't wish me a happy birthday. The reason I came back both times was because of Julie. I didn't want to leave without her. I wanted to stay with my wife,
Yes.
But then I realized that she wasn't with me, and I was going to go crazy if I stayed there.
Right.
So on September 15th, 1990, I was in Hemet, living. I didn't have my car. They'd taken all that. I literally missed the bus. There was a mission that was there was an ethics program going on at the Gold Base. You had to be there on time, or you had to go to the RPF, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, yes. I missed the bus on purpose, and I ran across a field to a machine shop that was near the apartment place. I called a taxi. I had credit cards. Okay, and that's the other thing. I had credit cards, okay, my credit cards. Yeah. And so I took a taxi to the Ramada Inn on Florida Avenue.
Yes.
I checked into a room. I immediately called the security booth, and I said, you guys either give me my car and give me my shit, or I'm going to the police. And I'm serious. And they knew I was serious. Yeah. They got Mike Sutter on the phone. And they said, okay, well, we'll get your stuff together. But what about Julie? And I said, have her there. I don't, whatever. He goes, we need you to come back to the base. I said, how do I know you're not going to just grab me? They said, well, come with the taxi and have the taxi wait. We'll have your car up by building 36. You know what that is, up there and all that. So I did. I took a taxi in. My car was there. And then I had to meet with Julie, and actually Jackson. Gary Moorhead was in the meeting. He was the security chief. And basically I wrote Julie a check for half my bank account. We had about, at that time, about $18,000, $17,000. I said, look, I'm going to give you a check, half the money. Even though it was my money, I said, here's half the money. I'm taking the car. You keep all of our furniture and stuff, and that's it. And she goes, why? And I made up an excuse. I said, I want to have kids. Because at that time you could not have kids in the Sea Org. Yeah. I said, I want to have kids, and I told something that, maybe she could understand or whatever. So she asked me not to go to her father, who was not a Scientologist. But of course, that's exactly where I went. Anyway, that's my leaving for good.
Wow.
And I was upset because I couldn't leave, I didn't want to leave my wife,
No, but of course not.
You get to the point where you're about to go crazy.
Right. You reach your breaking point, and unfortunately, there's fallout.
Anyway, I know I've talked a long time. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, let's do this. If it's all right with you, we'll wrap up here. Yep. I think we should do separate episodes on your experiences. Yeah,
and we could talk about what happened afterwards, and Shelly and my relationship with Shelly and Miscavige and all that. We can do separate, but that at least takes you through my Sea Org career.
Yes, and thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of that. I really appreciate it. Is there anything that you would like me to link to in terms of to just include for reference for people, or we?
No, I'm retired. I'm just, and by the way, you can retire after you leave the Sea Org,
Yes.
Just tell everybody out there.
There is life after Scientology, including.
Well, and then that somebody asked about, Social Security. They take your 35 best years of income. So if you leave Scientology or Sea Org, leave early, because then you can make money. Like I made all my money after I left, and so now I have a retirement that I wouldn't have had if I'd stayed in the Sea Org.
Nice. So for anyone listening who's in the Sea Organization, leave now. The Aftermath Foundation will help you. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Mark.
No problem,
I appreciate
Claire. Thanks for your patience.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.